turkey work, or the French stitch, which we did here on the center of the big pink flower, is just so much fun that I wanted to make an entire flower out of it. And so we're going to use it for the anemones that are on either side of the big pink flower, although anemones have a petal and this is really just going to be all fringe, but that's okay. We're not trying to be realistic here. So to do these two flowers, fill in the center oval with the very center has a mix of French knots of the light blue and dark blue, and then a ring around the outside edge of either one of the light or dark pinks. And then to do this fringe, we're going to do the fringe stitch just like we did it before, although we're going to go all the way around in a circle. And I'm going to, you see kind of a double ring here. I am going to start a little bit out away. I'm not going to snug the first row all the way close to these French knots. We're actually going to end up making 3 rows of the fringe stitch. 2 rows are going to be white, and then the one right next to the center is going to be the dark blue. So to start, like I said, oh, sorry, I always do that, always come up wrong on the fringe stitch. Go down, don't come up, go down. And just as we did before, leave that tail like that. Eventually, the outside edge of this flower is going to be about a half an inch, 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to leave the loops about 3/4 of an inch or so. Obviously, I'm not going to have the flower be huge like this. It's really going to sort of just barely graze the edge of this flower and over here. So I want to make the loops that I'm going to stitch at least a little bit longer, because I am going to be trimming them off just like I did on the center of the big flower. So I've come down, this is the exact same stitch. Lock that one and then start making my loops all the way across. So nothing new here. We've already done this stitch. We're just doing it in the white 3 strands of DMC white thread. So there's my first loop. A locking stitch for that. And keep going with the loops. And since we are working right up against, there's not like I said, 3 rows are going to go between here and here. So I'm really just going to do one whole row and then come back around and do a second row of white, pretty much just practically right on top of that row. That won't show, and I don't want to get too far out from that center because I don't want this flower to just become huge. So these little locking stitches are going to be hidden anyway by the dark blue row of fringe. So I am going to continue all the way around and do one whole row around this oval and then a second row of white, and I will come back and show you what that looks like. The 2 white rows of loops are finished now, and so the next thing to do is going to be to do the little inside ring of dark blue fringe that goes right up next to the center. And I could just go ahead and do it, but having to not just stitch but then also trim that blue thread is going to be really tricky, because it's going to be one length, it's going to be a very short length, and then these are going to be a longer length. So that's going to be really hard to do, to both stitch that and trim it with these white loops out here. It can be done, it's kind of a little chaotic because these white loops keep wanting to get caught up in that other thread. So I came up with this very simple, kind of silly little hack, but it works great actually. What I did was I just took a piece of paper and I cut a hole in it that was a little bit bigger, as you can see there. Get those white threads to lay down flat. That's just a little bit bigger than my center. So I just put 2 pieces of tape on it and I center it right there, and I just get that tape. I just kind of, let me get one more piece up here because it'll stick better up there like that. Okay. One more. This doesn't have to be super flat. You're just trying to keep those white threads from getting all tangled up in the blue threads as you stitch. So it looks a little silly, I know, but trust me, it works. And it makes stitching the blue, and especially trimming the blue, much, much easier. So let me do the blue. I will stitch it and I will trim it so that you can see how much easier it is to do this with this little mask thing. And this blue ring of fringe is going to end up being shorter than 1/4 of an inch actually. So I don't have to make these that long, but I do want them to be longer. They're probably going to be just about what you see where this this cutout is. So I know I need to make them at least longer than right there. So that gives me a little bit of extra to... Oh, I actually did that wrong. Oh well, I'll just lock that loop down. I told you I always mess up the first stitch on fringe stitch, but I'll just make a loop. No harm done there. Alright, I'll stitch this and you can see it as I finish it up. Okay, I have finished stitching the blue fringe, and before I take off this paper mask thing, I'm going to go ahead and trim it because the trimming of the blue would be particularly difficult if I was trying to not clip the white threads. So let me do that. It always helps if I sort of pinch the loops with these fingers and trim them off. Hopefully I have trimmed those off enough because I was sort of working blind, but let me remove the white paper now. And, well, it looks like I missed one little loop. I can quickly just grab that one. I do not want to clip. Come here, you. Do not want to clip any of the white threads. So the blue is done. Now all I have left to do is to trim the white. And just as before, when you were working over here, you want to be very careful not to clip any of the felt pieces or obviously not pierce the fabric beneath it. So once that's clipped, that flower will be done. All right, that was fun. The berries are next up, and they are really neat because they are three-dimensional and they're unlike anything else we've done so far. And technically, the berries are considered stump work, and stump work in embroidery is really the simple explanation is just 3D embroidery, embroidery that stands up and away from the hoop. And this is what they're going to look like when we are finished with them. So I've left a little tail on it, but I'll explain that. So here's a finished one. We're going to make all of them ahead of time and then attach them to the hoop. So to make the berries, you'll need a pony bead, which is just a plastic bead, real inexpensive, has a big hole in the center. Does not matter what color you use because it's all going to be covered up. But I just chose a brown because it's a dark color and I know these are going to be blue. And so here's how to start. So we are going to use 6 strands of DMC thread. Now it is important, if you remember back to the tutorial about how to strip threads, that is crucial for making the berries. If you started out with just 6 strands of unstripped thread that just as it comes off of the skein, they are all twisted together and it makes kind of a round, kind of a rope shape. When you strip them and lay them side by side, you create this sort of almost like a flat ribbon effect. The strands sit side by side instead of being twisted together in kind of a round rope. And we want them to lay flat and sit side by side so that they form a flat, they cover the bead in a flat manner, like almost like you were wrapping a ribbon around the bead. So let me explain what I'm talking about. The way to start, I have cut an 18-inch piece of DMC thread. Like I said, I made sure the strands were stripped. Here's the end of it. I'm going to just tie a plain single knot in the end, just like that. I don't want to tie that knot super tight. Just give it a slight tug so it's sort of tight, but not too tight, because the next step is to take your pony bead, run the thread through it, come back to your knot, and then I'm going to take my needle and put it through that knot, just like this. And here's the part that if I had pulled that knot really tightly, I wouldn't be able to get my needle through with the thick thread. So just hold the knot and pull the thread all the way through, and now it's come up on the bead, and pull really tightly. Now is when you want to pull really tightly. All right, and put that knot so that it is almost up inside the hole of the bead. Now I will clip that off. So I have a little tail there, like that. And now I'm going to sort of push that knot up inside the bead. All right, so you can already see, now it kind of comes back out. You can kind of see now how those strands of thread are laying flat on the bead. So the next thing to do is, here's our knot. I'm going to put the needle and thread up through the hole. And now when I pull it up, that will help to pull that knot up inside the bead. So this is where it gets a little fiddly, but I've sort of figured out the best way to sort of keep all these threads in place is to hold it with my non-dominant hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm holding it with my left hand. I'm going to pull up on the thread very tightly. I'm going to put my thumb right there, pull up, bring that thread over the bead, and hopefully you can see, let me get it really close. Hopefully you can see it. You can see how I'm making sure that those strands are laying flat next to the strands next to it. See that right there? I line them up. And then I kind of just roll my thumb and I hold them in place. So now it's really hard to see, but I'm pinching those strands underneath there. So now I'm going to put the needle back through the center and pull it tightly. And then I will, I have a little, that knot, the tail of the knot is coming through the top, and I didn't want that to happen. Go away, will ya? Let me trim that off. Usually those don't pop up like that. Do not want to trim my working threads. All right, so here we are. I'm holding on. This is the strands. These are the strands that I just wrapped around. I'm going to pinch those, pull this up around the bead, and sort of roll that bead to the left. And now I am gripping those strands with my thumb so they stay in place. Put the needle through the center, come up, do the whole process again. Pull tight, kind of make sure those strands are flattened out. Roll those strands, lay those strands, pull tightly on top of the bead. Rotate the bead. I'm pinching it with my left thumb. Come up through the bead and do that all the way around until you've covered the whole bead with these strands. Now sometimes, like you can see, I have a little space there. Sometimes you'll want to kind of push them together with your fingers like that. Just push them so they're all snugged up next to each other. You don't really want them to lay on top of each other or be crisscrossed. If you can, pull them so that they are all lined up and smooth and sit down right next to each other. So I'm going to push those together. Come up a little higher. Maybe you can see this. Pinch it with my thumb. Up through the bead. and pull tightly. And continue that all the way around until the bead is covered. Now the first one of these that you do, you're going to feel like you're all thumbs, and it's just, you got thread going everywhere and it's not laying in place, and that's all right. The more you do them, the more you kind of get the hang of it. When you kind of figure out where to put your thumbs and how to squish those strands together. So this is why you need a bead with a big hole, because you are going to continually be pulling your needle and thread up through the center. So I've almost covered the whole thing. Maybe 3 or 4 more passes. Almost there. All right, I've got a little bit of a space right there. Maybe one more time. Bring it down and cover that space. Now I'm going to look at the bead and make sure that I don't have any spaces, that none of that plastic bead is showing, and I think that's pretty good. Hold those strands in place and run it back through one more time. All right. So now if I don't want that thread to get loose, so I'm going to hold on to it pretty tightly. So there's that. To hold this thread in place where it comes out at the bottom, I am going to run my needle up under some of these threads, just like that. Can you see what I've done there? I've just put it right up, right through those really tight threads. That's another reason you want those threads to be really tight. Sometimes this is a little hard to pull that needle and all that thick thread. If you've made your strands are really tight, let me back up and maybe do a few less, not quite as many threads. There, now I can pull it all the way through. So I'm going to pull it through and tug on it, and that should keep that thread really tight. If you want to, if it feels loose, you can run it through maybe one more time. Just like that. So that's definitely going to be tight enough. All right, so there is my covered bead with, if you can see, I have this little tail on it with that little knot. That'll be hidden next to the fabric though. So now what we want to do is to get, you can see this one has a little seed bead down in at the end of it. So to do that, I'm going to unthread this needle. I'm going to separate out 2, you could do 1, but I'm going to do 2 of these threads through 2 of these strands. Hang on, come on, you. A little bit unwieldy here. All right, so now I've pulled out, get a hold of it, I've pulled out 2 strands, and I'm going to re-thread those on my needle, just like this. You could do this with a separate thread, but I just figured, you know, this thread's already there. It's already attached. Why attach another thread? So here's the bottom where my knot is, right there. I'm going to come up, back up through the center with my 2 strands of thread, like that. And now I'm going to slide a bead on to the needle and thread. This is where you have to make sure you're using the smaller needle so it will go through the seed bead. All right, I've slid the bead down to the tip, and now I'll just go back down, put that needle back down in the center, and pull that bead. Now, I don't want to pull too hard. All those threads in there should prevent that seed bead from just being sucked right up into the middle of the big bead, the covered bead. So there's my seed bead in the middle, and I could, for safety, really just quickly run that thread one more time underneath there just to sort of secure it so it doesn't come loose. So now I can take that off. And so I'm going to make all of these that I need in the right colors. All right, so now I have a bead with a tail on it. Can you see like that? And when I have all of these assembled, I will come back and I will put them on the hoop. And that's what I'll show you next. The very last thing we need to do to finish up this design is to attach all of those berries that we made previously. Now I will say that before I attach the berries, or before I started attaching these, I went ahead and did all of these white French knots. Let me zoom out a little bit and you can see I did all of these little decorative French knots all the way around the edge, simply because you could do them after you attach the berries, but it's really easier to do that many French knots when you don't have something that could easily catch those threads. And these just stand up away from the hoop a little bit, from the fabric, the surface. So it's really easier to do all those French knots and then attach the berries afterwards. But you can do it in a reverse order. It doesn't really matter. I just want to let you know that. So let's go back in. And what I have done is, so we made all of these berries and we left a tail. Now you just need to thread that tail onto a needle and put them down on the places where each of them go. Now you can see this one I've already done, and I've just left it loose for the moment. Before I knot it on the back and pull it tight and do that, I want to make sure they're in the right place. And honestly, when I was working on these other ones, there were several times that I pulled it out and put it in a slightly different place, because these are a little bit, they kind of have a mind of their own. So I'm just going to make a guess as to where that one that I'm working on would go. I think I might have gotten lucky with that one, because I want these to, I don't want them to sit on the fabric exactly face up. Let me see if I can get them to do that. I don't really want them to just be exactly face up because they don't look realistic. I want them to be at an angle, more like they're sort of on their sides. And like I said, this is where they get a little fiddly. You kind of have to make them behave. So as long as I know that that's, if I am pulling the thread on the back and they are pretty much in the right place, like down here I had to, where there's three of them, I had to pull it out and redo, I think, each of these a couple of times to get them to be close enough together and allow me to angle them the way I wanted them to be without them leaving a big space in the middle. Two of them is a little bit easier, but that looks pretty good. So now I can go ahead and knot these long threads on the back, and to securely hold them next to the fabric so they're not loose like that. But there's one other thing left to do, that because they do kind of move around. See that? Even though if I'm pulling it tightly on the back, they still want to kind of bobble around a little bit. So what I did to keep them, to hold them in place, is I just threaded one strand of, I think this is the light blue. You could do either the dark blue or light blue. I just happen to have the light blue handy. So I have threaded my needle with one strand of the light blue, and I'm going to, after I knot these on the back, I will come up underneath each berry and I will turn it kind of facing the way I want it to face, and I will, on kind of on the underneath, let me get this one out of the way so maybe you can see what I'm talking about. If I want this one to face this way, I will put that thread and I'll catch the wrapped threads on the bead. This would normally be tight against the fabric because I have not knotted it yet, but normally. And so see, I've caught a little bit of that, the thread that I wrapped around that bead, and I'll go back down into the fabric, and I'll just do that several times with this to pull that bead and anchor it so that it stays facing the direction I want it to face. And so that's all you have to do for that. That's pretty simple. Just kind of keep working with them till you get them to face the direction you want them, and want them to be exactly where you want them to sit on the fabric. And that is the last thing for this design. I hope you have enjoyed working on this with me. I think this is a really interesting design. The felt is fun. So anyway, I hope you had a good time learning all these different kinds of stitches and all of the ways that you can apply felt to your embroidery. All right, thanks for joining me. Bye.